So one of the questions that I get asked most frequently is, can we have a look at your process, or do you have any videos on how you go about creating spaceships or some of the worlds that you explore? And generally, I don't. I don't tend to record too many videos because I'm a bit camera shy. Uh, but I have my Chipotle, so let's see how this goes. It's not going to be a complete breakdown of everything, but I'll try to go through a bit of the process on how I go about creating some of these things. So for this short breakdown, I'm going to be using the S-13 speeder aircraft as an example. Generally, I start most of my work within 3ds Max. Occasionally, I'll do like a quick thumbnail sketch or a couple scribbles here and there to kind of get an idea. But I generally just start modeling right away in 3ds Max and just start knocking out small pieces at a time and kind of see where the design goes, where it wants to be. For this one, I think I started off with the engine. I like making engines, so I was modeling this piece out, and as I kept fleshing it out, I'm like, oh, could totally probably make a cool speeder out of this, and it evolved into this. The final output for this model is going to be an illustration, so I don't tend to worry too much about the topology at this stage. As you can see, it's a little dense. There's some stretching and stuff going on. But since the output is just a 2D illustration, I don't really worry too much about it. If it was going to go into a game engine or something a little bit more real time, then I would obviously like optimize and create a low poly model and bake everything down and do all that stuff. But for an illustration, it's okay to be a little messy. From here, I'll go ahead and bring it into Zbrush for like additional detailing and painting. So here in Zbrush, I'll bring the model in and crank the poly count pretty high, and then I'll just start cutting in details, adding additional panel lines, um, some damage, just something that adds a little character to it. And then I'll go ahead and paint it and give it a nice paint job, usually just by hand, just painting stuff up. Add some decals and get it to a place where I feel comfortable with it, where I think it's kind of conveying the image that I'm going after. And then from here, I will export it into Keyshot if I'm using that, or back into 3ds Max if I'm using Octane. For this one, I use Keyshot, so go ahead and bring this into Keyshot and show you where I go from there. So now we're in Keyshot, and obviously it's not a time lapse, so there's like a lot of in between steps that are missing through here. Predominantly, I went ahead and created a background for it, sculpted up some rocks, got that kind of ready. Then once in Keyshot, I kind of play around here with different compositions, try to see what looks cool, get some good angles, kind of try to convey like the vision that I'm going for. This was the angle that I decided to go with. It matched closely to like the vision of what I was going after. So once the materials are all set up and have the lighting looking just right, I'll go ahead and get this thing ready to render. And usually I just render it with like a black background. So there's usually nothing there. It's just a transparency, and I'll render it with a couple layers. The color, the clown mask, which is just another layer with a bunch of different colors, so I can pick and choose in Photoshop. Maybe some normal passes and stuff if I want to, pick different light points through here. I'll render that out into those layers, and then I'll just bring them into Photoshop for composition. This is how my comps tend to look when I first get started. In Photoshop, it's just the image and a black background. The first thing I do is I try to go and play around with like the color of the background, just to kind of start setting the mood and like the atmosphere for what I'm trying to go for. Everything else is just painted here from here on out. So in this one, I ended up deciding to go with like this nice blue hue. I think it was giving that calming feeling that I was trying to go to. During this, I'll go ahead and set up a background, start building up some of the atmosphere for it, create some engine flares, some of that dynamic aspect to it, add some dust, and a lot of like the foreground elements. Finish off with some like effects to kind of like just ground it and tie it in together nicely. Some grain, obviously like some post effects to really kind of like balance everything out and make sure the curves and everything are all right. And I add the signature. And that's it. That's pretty much a condensed overview of how I go about creating one of my illustrations. Obviously, like if you were to expand all this out and all the time that would go into each one of these, I'd say it's hard kind of like estimating the exact time because they're all so different. But on average, if I had to guess, I would say each one of these is between about 60 to 80, maybe 100 hours per an illustration, going into like all the conceptual phases, all the thought process that goes behind like the concept, the modeling, the texturing, all the rendering, and then all the post composition that goes into creating one of these final products. So I hope that gives you a sneak peek into how I go about creating some of these illustrations. Thanks.